I was standing in the sculpture garden of the Metropolitan Museum, admiring a Rodin bronze that had always been my favorite, when my phone buzzed with a call that would change everything. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Victoria. Sterling, my business partner of 12 years. But what she was about to tell me would reveal that the woman I trusted with my life's work had been plotting my destruction from the very beginning. And what she didn't know was that I'd been 3 steps ahead of her for the past 6 months. The afternoon sun filtered through the glass ceiling of the museum's European paintings wing, casting golden light across the marble floors. I'd come, here to clear my head after a particularly stressful week at Sterling & Associates, the premier art authentication firm I'd co-founded with Victoria 12 years ago. My phone vibrated against my palm. Victoria's name appeared on the screen with that familiar photo of her immaculate smile, the one that had charmed collectors and critics alike for over a decade. Something about the timing felt off. She knew I came here to disconnect from the business world. "Hello, Victoria," I answered, watching tourists drift past a priceless Monet. "Rachel." Her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, sharp and decisive. "I'm calling because there's something I need to tell you." The background noise suggested she wasn't at our Manhattan gallery. Car horns, distant conversations, street sounds from somewhere unfamiliar. "I'm dissolving our partnership," she continued without waiting for my response. Effective immediately. I gripped the phone tighter, my eyes still fixed on the Monet, but seeing nothing. "What are you talking about?" "I've acquired controlling interest in the company through a private investor. The paperwork was filed this morning. Oh, and I've also liquidated our joint authentication contracts with the Whitfield Collection, the Morrison Estate, and the European Museum Consortium." The Whitfield Collection alone was worth $12 million in authentication fees. The Morrison Estate had been courting us for 3 years. These weren't just contracts. They were the foundation of everything we'd built together. "Victoria, what's going on? We can discuss whatever's bothering you." "There's nothing to discuss, Rachel. I'm taking the business in a new direction, one that doesn't include your services." The coldness in her voice was like ice water in my veins. This wasn't the woman who'd cried with joy when we landed our first major client, who'd celebrated every success as if we were sisters. "And before you start plotting some kind of legal challenge," she continued, her tone now openly mocking, "you should know that I've been documenting your authentication methods for quite some time. Let's just say your approach to certain gray areas wouldn't look favorable under legal scrutiny." My blood turned to ice. She was threatening to destroy my professional reputation based on lies. "You have 48 hours to clear your personal items from the gallery," Victoria said. "Security has been instructed not to allow you access after Friday." Victoria. "Oh, and Rachel, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. You know I have connections throughout the art world. Your reputation is only as good as the stories people tell about you." The line went dead. I stood there in the museum corridor, surrounded by priceless masterpieces, holding a phone that had just delivered the destruction of my life's work. Tourists continued flowing around me, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered my world. But what Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that I'd been expecting this call for months. That evening, I sat in my Upper East Side apartment, a glass of wine untouched on the coffee table beside me. The city lights twinkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, but my attention was focused on the laptop screen in front of me and the encrypted files I'd been compiling for the past 6 months. 6 months ago, I'd noticed discrepancies in our authentication reports. Tiny changes in technical language, subtle alterations to provenance documentation, microscopic adjustments that most people would never catch. But I'd been authenticating artwork for 15 years. I noticed everything. Victoria thought she was clever, positioning herself to steal our client base and destroy my credibility. What she didn't realize was that I'd been a forensic art analyst before we partnered, specializing in detecting forgeries and fraud for insurance companies. Pattern recognition wasn't just my job, it was my obsession. The evidence spread across. My screen told a story Victoria never intended me to read. Financial records show mysterious payments to offshore consulting firms, email threads with collectors that bypassed our official company channels. Most damning of all, authentication certificates bearing forged versions of my signature on artworks I'd never examined. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen, my contact at the FBI's art crime team. We'd worked together years ago on a major forgery case, and I'd reached out to him 2 weeks ago when I'd finally assembled enough evidence to understand the scope of Victoria's operation. Documentation received. This is bigger than we thought. Can you meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Federal Building, floor 23, I typed back. I'll be there. Victoria had made a critical error. She'd assumed I was the same trusting partner who'd believed in our shared vision 12 years ago. But betrayal has a way of sharpening your survival instincts, and I'd spent months learning exactly who Victoria Sterling really was beneath the polished exterior. The next morning, I drove through Manhattan traffic toward our gallery in Chelsea, knowing it would be one of the last times I'd enter the space we'd built together. Victoria's security changes wouldn't take effect until Friday, which gave me exactly what I needed: access to the physical files she didn't know I'd been copying. Sterling and Associates occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse with our main showroom on the ground level and administrative offices above. I'd spent countless hours in this building, staying late to perfect authentication reports, celebrating successful acquisitions, and building what I thought was a legitimate business. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where Victoria's office overlooked the gallery below. She wouldn't be in today. Her calendar showed meetings with potential investors all week, though I now understood these were likely buyers for the stolen authentication contracts. Her office door was locked, but I'd been co-owner for 12 years. My master key still worked. Inside, everything looked exactly as Victoria had left it. Pristine desk, expensive artwork on the walls, the Persian rug we'd bought together after our first profitable year. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. The filing cabinet behind her desk contained the physical documents I needed: contracts, correspondence, financial records that existed only in hard copy because Victoria was paranoid about digital security. She'd been careful to hide her digital trail, but old-fashioned paper documents had been her blind spot. I photographed everything with a high-resolution camera, making sure to capture letterheads, signatures, dates, and account numbers. The story the documents told was devastating. Victoria had been systematically authenticating forgeries for preferred clients while providing legitimate analysis for others, manipulating our shared reputation to create a 2-tier system of truth. But the most shocking discovery was a letter dated 3 months ago, addressed to Victoria from someone named Jonathan Pierce, a collector I'd never heard of. The Hartwell acquisition has been successful. Recommend proceeding with Phase 2 of the replacement program. The original Picasso from the Morrison estate is now secured in Geneva. Documentation attached confirms authentication bypass was undetected. Proceed with sterling-only contracts as discussed. My hands trembled as I photographed the letter. Victoria wasn't just authenticating forgeries. She was helping to steal original artworks and replace them with copies, using our company's reputation to legitimize the fraud. This wasn't just business theft. This was international art crime on a massive scale. The Federal Building's 23rd floor housed the FBI's specialized crime units, including the art crime team that investigated theft, forgery, and trafficking of cultural artifacts. I'd been here before, years ago, helping to expose a ring of forgers operating out of New Jersey. Marcus Chen met me in the same conference room where we'd worked together 5 years earlier. He looked older, more serious, but his eyes lit up with professional excitement when he saw the evidence I'd brought. "Rachel, this is extraordinary," he said, spreading my photographs across the conference table. We've been tracking suspicious activity in the high-end authentication market for 2 years, but we never had enough evidence to build a case. How extensive is this? I asked, watching him sort the documents into categories. Based on what you've shown me, we're looking at a minimum of 15 stolen artworks worth over $40 million. But the real damage is to the integrity of the entire authentication system. If collectors can't trust authentication firms, the entire market becomes vulnerable to fraud. He picked up the letter from Jonathan Pierce, studying it through a magnifying glass. We know this name. Pierce operates a network of high-end collectors who specialize in acquiring artwork through unconventional means. If Victoria's been working with him, she's connected to international art trafficking. What happens? Now? I asked. Now we build a federal case. But Rachel, I need you to understand something. This investigation could take months, and Victoria will likely discover what's happening long before we're ready to make arrests. I smiled, reaching into my briefcase for one more folder. That's where you're wrong, Marcus. Victoria won't discover anything because she's about to be too busy dealing with a more immediate problem. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to hit that subscribe button. Right now, trust me, the way Rachel turns the tables on Victoria is about to blow your mind, and you won't want to miss how this story ends. What happens in the next few minutes will show you exactly why you should never underestimate someone you've betrayed. Hit subscribe. This is about to get incredible. I handed Marcus a thick folder containing financial documents, email printouts, and authentication certificates. While Victoria was planning to destroy my reputation, I was documenting every fraudulent authentication she's performed in the past 18 months. This folder contains evidence of 63 separate instances of authentication fraud, complete with forensic analysis proving the artworks were forgeries. Marcus's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents. But more importantly, I continued, I've prepared a complete reconstruction of our client database, financial records, and authentication protocols. Victoria thinks she's stolen our business, but what she's actually stolen is a company with no legitimate assets and massive legal liabilities. Explain. 6 months ago, when I first suspected Victoria was planning something, I established a separate company called Meridian Art Authentication. I've been quietly transferring our legitimate clients to Meridian while leaving Victoria with only the fraudulent contracts and forged documentation. I pulled out my phone and showed Marcus a legal document. As of this morning, every legitimate authentication contract Sterling and Associates ever held has been legally transferred to Meridian Art Authentication. Victoria now owns a company whose entire client base consists of art forgers and thieves. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. So when Victoria dissolved your partnership and claimed ownership of Sterling and Associates, she claimed ownership of a criminal enterprise with $40 million in legal liabilities and zero legitimate assets. The FBI's investigation will focus entirely on Sterling and Associates, while Meridian continues operating as a clean, legitimate business. And the clients she thought she was stealing will receive notification this afternoon that their authentication contracts have been transferred to Meridian due to Sterling and Associates' pending legal difficulties. Victoria will be left holding contracts for stolen artwork and forged documents, while I maintain relationships with every legitimate collector we've ever worked with. Marcus shook his head in amazement. Rachel, this is the most sophisticated counter-fraud operation I've ever seen from a civilian. Victoria taught me something important, I said, gathering my documents. If someone's going to betray you, make sure they're betraying themselves in the process. Friday afternoon, I sat in my new office at Meridian Art Authentication, 3 blocks from the gallery Victoria thought she'd stolen from me. The space was smaller but more elegant, with better lighting for examining artwork and state-of-the-art security systems. My assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Harrison, there's a Victoria Sterling here to see you. She seems agitated. I smiled. Send her in. Victoria burst through the door without waiting for an invitation, her usual composure completely shattered. Her expensive suit was wrinkled, her perfect hair disheveled, and her eyes held a wildness I'd never seen before. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded, slamming a stack of papers onto my desk. I glanced at the documents, legal notices from the Whitfield collection, the Morrison estate, and half a dozen other clients, all terminating their contracts with Sterling and Associates due to concerns about authentication integrity and pending legal investigation. "I'm running a business, Victoria, same as always. You sabotaged me. These clients were legally contracted to Sterling and Associates." I picked up the top letter, reading it slowly. "Actually, if you examine the contract language carefully, you'll notice that all authentication agreements were personally with me, not with the company. When you dissolved our partnership and banned me from Sterling and Associates, you inadvertently voided every legitimate contract we held." Victoria's face went pale. "That's impossible. I reviewed every contract with our lawyers." "Did you review them with lawyers who specialize in art authentication agreements? Because there are very specific industry standards that general business attorneys often miss." I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her, showing a document titled Meridian Art Authentication, Active Client Contracts. Every legitimate client we've ever worked with received notification that their authentication services would continue through Meridian, effective immediately. The transition was seamless because I maintained backup copies of all authentication reports, client communications, and technical documentation. Victoria stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "But the contracts you claimed ownership of," I continued, "the ones you thought were worth millions in revenue, those remain with Sterling and Associates. All of them, along with the legal liabilities they represent." "What legal liabilities?" I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a letter from the FBI's art crime team, dated that morning. "Sterling and Associates is now the subject of a federal investigation into art forgery and trafficking. The FBI has evidence that your company has been authenticating stolen artwork and providing fraudulent documentation to international collectors." Victoria grabbed the letter, reading frantically. "This is ridiculous. I never—" "You never what, Victoria? Never authenticated the forged Picasso for Jonathan Pierce? Never provided false provenance documentation for the stolen Monet from the Henderson collection? Never signed my name to authentication certificates for artwork I'd never examined?" She dropped the letter, backing toward the door. "You can't prove any of that." I smiled, reaching for my phone. "Actually, I can." I pressed play on a digital recording, and Victoria's voice filled the room. "The authentication process is really quite simple to manipulate. Rachel is so focused on technical accuracy that she never pays attention to the business relationships. As long as the paperwork looks legitimate, she'll sign off on anything." Victoria's face went white. "Where did you get that?" "From your office phone system. Did you know that our business line automatically records all calls for quality assurance? I've been reviewing those recordings for months." I played another clip. "The Pierce network pays triple our normal fee for expedited authentication. Rachel doesn't need to know about these special arrangements. What she doesn't know won't hurt our bottom line." "That's taken out of context." "Is it?" I interrupted, pulling out a folder thick with printed emails. "Because I also have 6 months of email correspondence between you and Jonathan Pierce, discussing the replacement program for stolen artwork." Victoria lunged for the folder, but I held it out of reach. "These are copies, Victoria. The originals are with the FBI, along with financial records showing payments from offshore accounts linked to known art trafficking networks." She slumped into the chair across from my desk, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured balloon. "But the most interesting evidence," I continued, "is this." I turned my laptop screen toward her again, this time showing a spreadsheet titled Authentication Fraud Timeline. "I've documented 63 separate instances where you authenticated forged or stolen artwork while claiming the work came from my analysis. You've been forging my signature for over a year, using my reputation to legitimize criminal activity. Victoria stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Rachel, you have to understand. Understand what? That you decided to destroy my career to cover up your own crimes? That you tried to steal my business to prevent me from discovering your fraud? That you threatened to ruin my reputation while you were actually ruining your own? I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the street where Victoria had parked her car. Probably the last luxury she'd be able to afford for quite some time. The FBI will be executing search warrants on Sterling and Associates this afternoon, I said without turning around. I suggest you call your lawyer. By evening, the art world was buzzing with news of the FBI raid on Sterling and Associates. I watched from my office window as news vans lined the street outside Victoria's gallery, reporters interviewing shocked clients and former employees. My phone had been ringing constantly with calls from collectors, museums, and auction houses, all wanting to know whether their authentication certificates were legitimate or part of Victoria's fraud scheme. Each call reinforced what I'd known. For months, trust in the art authentication business was built on personal relationships and professional reputation, not company names or fancy offices. Marcus Chen called just after 7 p.m. Rachel, I wanted to give you an update. The search warrant yielded evidence beyond what we'd hoped for. Victoria's office contained documentation for an international network of art thieves and forgers operating in 12 countries. How extensive is the damage? We're looking at over 80 stolen artworks worth approximately $60 million. Museums in France, Italy, and Germany have been notified that pieces in their collections may need to be re-authenticated. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of how close the entire art world had come to systematic corruption. But there's more, Marcus continued. Victoria's arrest this afternoon led to a confession. She's agreed to cooperate with the international investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. And the stolen artwork? Recovery operations are already underway. The original pieces that were replaced with forgeries are being tracked down through the financial network you helped us map. After hanging up with Marcus, I sat alone in my office, processing the magnitude of what had unfolded. Victoria hadn't just tried to steal my business. She'd been using our shared reputation to facilitate crimes that undermined the integrity of cultural institutions worldwide. My computer chimed with an email from Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, director of the Metropolitan Museum's European Paintings Department. Ms. Harrison, given recent developments with Sterling and Associates, the Metropolitan would like to discuss retaining Meridian art authentication for our upcoming acquisitions review. Your reputation for integrity has never been more valuable to the museum community. Similar emails were arriving every few minutes from collectors, auction houses, and museums around the world. The art community was rallying around authentication services they could trust, and Victoria's Betrayal had inadvertently established Meridian as the most trusted name in the business. 3 months later, Meridian art authentication had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 12 specialists, occupying 2 floors of a prestigious building near the Museum Mile. We'd implemented new security protocols, advanced forensic techniques, and transparent documentation systems that set industry standards for authentication integrity. I was reviewing applications for our new apprenticeship program when my assistant announced that I had a visitor. Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the Smithsonian is here for your meeting about the Authentication Standards Consortium. The consortium was my proudest achievement, a collaborative effort between major museums, auction houses, and authentication firms to establish universal standards for art verification. The scandal with Victoria had revealed how vulnerable the art world was to fraud, and institutions were eager to implement safeguards that would prevent similar corruption. Sarah, thank you for coming, I said, greeting the Smithsonian's chief curator. Rachel, what you've accomplished in 3 months is remarkable. The consortium proposal has support from institutions worldwide. We're finally going to have standardized protocols that will protect both collectors and cultural heritage. As we discussed implementation timelines and certification requirements, I reflected on how different my life had become. Victoria's betrayal had initially felt like the end of everything I'd worked for, but it had actually been the catalyst for building something far more meaningful. "There's one more thing," Sarah said as our meeting concluded. "The International Association of Art Dealers wants to offer you their Distinguished Service Award for advancing authentication integrity. The ceremony is next month in London." Recognition from the international art community meant more than any business success. Victoria had tried to destroy my reputation, but her crimes had instead elevated my standing as someone who prioritized truth over profit. 6 months after Victoria's arrest, her trial began in federal court. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the evidence I'd provided, and I was called as the government's primary witness to explain the technical aspects of authentication fraud. The courtroom was packed with art dealers, museum directors, and journalists covering what the media had dubbed the biggest art fraud scandal in decades. Victoria sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller and older than I remembered, her confident demeanor replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose entire identity had been stripped away. "Ms. Harrison," the prosecutor began, "can you explain to the jury how authentication fraud impacts the art community?" I looked directly at Victoria as I answered. "Authentication is the foundation of trust in the art world. When that trust is betrayed, it doesn't just harm individual collectors. It undermines cultural institutions, legitimate dealers, and the preservation of artistic heritage." The prosecutor showed the jury examples of Victoria's forged authentication certificates, comparing them to legitimate documents I'd prepared. The technical differences were subtle but damning, slight variations in language that indicated the authenticator had never actually examined the artwork in question. "And these forgeries," the prosecutor continued, "were created to legitimize stolen artwork worth over $60 million? That's correct. Ms. Sterling was not just stealing from individual collectors. She was participating in the systematic theft of cultural artifacts from museums and private collections around the world." During cross-examination, Victoria's defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-partner seeking revenge, but the evidence spoke for itself. Financial records, recorded phone calls, and forensic analysis had created an unshakable case. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all charges. Victoria was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of $42 million, money she would never have, given that her assets had been seized to compensate victims of her fraud. As she was led away in handcuffs, Victoria looked at me one last time. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just recognition of how completely she had misjudged the person she'd tried to destroy. The Victoria Sterling case became a watershed moment for the art authentication industry. Museums worldwide began implementing the consortium standards we'd developed, creating unprecedented transparency in art verification. Auction houses established new protocols requiring multiple independent authentications for high-value pieces. Insurance companies developed specialized policies to protect against authentication fraud. But the most satisfying outcome was personal. Jonathan Pierce's entire trafficking network had been dismantled, leading to the recovery of stolen artwork from private collections in 8 countries. Pieces that had been missing from museums for years were returned to their rightful institutions, and forged works were removed from collections that had unknowingly displayed them. I received a letter from the director of the Musée d'Orsay in Baissati, Paris, thanking Meridian for helping to recover a Monet that had been stolen from their collection 3 years earlier. The painting had been replaced with a forgery so skillful that museum experts hadn't detected the switch until our authentication protocols revealed inconsistencies in the canvas composition. "Ms. Harrison," the letter read, "your courage in exposing this fraud has not only restored a masterpiece to our collection, but has protected the integrity of museums worldwide. The art community owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. These letters arrived weekly from institutions around the globe, each one representing artwork, history, and cultural heritage preserved because Victoria's crimes had been exposed before they could spread further. 2 years after Victoria's trial, Meridian Art Authentication had become the most respected verification firm in the world. We operated offices in New York, London, Paris, and Tokyo, employing over 60 specialists in various aspects of art forensics and historical research. But success had never been about money or recognition. It had been about rebuilding trust in an industry that Victoria had nearly destroyed through her greed and arrogance. I was in my office reviewing authentication reports when Marcus Chen called with unexpected news. "Rachel, I wanted to let you know that Victoria Sterling has requested a meeting with you." I set down my pen, surprised by how little emotion the name evoked now. "She wants to see me?" "She's been cooperative with ongoing investigations, helping us track down additional stolen artwork. Her lawyer says she has information that might interest you personally." "What kind of information?" "She won't say. But given how helpful she's been with recovery operations, the Bureau thinks it might be worthwhile." I considered the request. Victoria was serving her sentence at a minimum security federal facility in Connecticut, about 2 hours from Manhattan. Part of me was curious about what she could possibly want to discuss after everything that had happened. "I'll think about it," I told Marcus. That evening, I found myself standing in my apartment, looking at a framed photo from our early days in business together. Victoria and I at the opening of our first gallery show, both young and excited about the future we thought we were building together. The woman in that photograph had been my friend, my partner, someone I'd trusted with my deepest professional ambitions. What had turned her into someone capable of such systematic betrayal? Maybe it was time to find out. The Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut looked more like a college campus than a prison. Low buildings surrounded by landscaped grounds, with minimum security that reflected the white-collar nature of most inmates' crimes. Victoria was waiting in the visiting room when I arrived, wearing a standard-issue beige uniform that made her look younger and more vulnerable than I remembered. Her perfect hair had grown out to its natural brown color, and without professional makeup, she looked like the art history graduate student I'd first met 15 years earlier. "Rachel," she said quietly, "thank you for coming." I sat across from her at a small table, noting how different she seemed from the confident woman who'd tried to destroy my career. Prison had a way of stripping away pretense. "Marcus said you had information for me." Victoria nodded, reaching into a folder she'd been allowed to bring. "I've been working with the FBI to recover stolen artwork, and there's something you need to know about your own collection." She handed me a photograph of a painting I recognized immediately, a small Degas pastel that hung in my apartment, a piece I'd inherited from my grandmother. "Victoria, what does this have to do with anything?" "That painting was stolen from a private collector in Boston in 1987. It's been missing for over 30 years. I stared at the photograph, feeling the ground shift beneath me. "That's impossible. This painting has been in my family since before I was born. Your grandmother purchased it in good faith from a dealer who didn't know it was stolen. But according to FBI records, the original owner's family has been searching for it since your grandmother's death." The implications hit me like a physical blow. The painting I'd looked at every day for years, that reminded me of my grandmother's love of art, was stolen property. "Why are you telling me this?" Victoria's expression softened in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Because despite everything that happened between us, I know how much integrity means to you. The original owner's granddaughter is now in her 70s. She's been searching for this painting her entire adult life." I closed my eyes, processing what Victoria was telling me. "You could have kept this information to yourself." "Yes, I could have. But Rachel, you taught me something important about The difference between legal ownership and moral responsibility. I destroyed my career and betrayed our friendship because I chose profit over principles. You have the chance to choose differently. 3 weeks later, I stood in the elegant living room of Eleanor Walsh, a 74-year-old woman whose grandfather had commissioned the Degas pastel as a gift for her grandmother's wedding in 1923. The painting had hung in their Boston home for 60 years before being stolen during a burglary that devastated the family. "Ms. Harrison," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the painting I'd brought. "I never thought I'd see this again. My grandmother used to tell me stories about posing for preliminary sketches when she was young." "The painting belongs with your family," I said simply. "I'm just sorry it took so long to return it." Eleanor insisted on compensating me for the painting's value, but I declined. The piece had never truly been mine. I'd been its caretaker, not its owner. Returning it felt like completing a circle that Victoria's crimes had helped me understand. "There is one thing I'd like to ask," Eleanor said as I prepared to leave. "Would you consider authenticating some other pieces in my collection? I have several works that have been in my family for generations, and after everything that's happened with stolen artwork, I want to make sure everything is properly documented." I smiled, thinking about how even this difficult situation had created an opportunity to preserve legitimate artistic heritage. I'd be honored to help. As I drove back to Manhattan, I called Marcus Chen to report that the Degas had been successfully returned to its rightful owner. "Rachel, you know you didn't have to do this. The statute of limitations had expired, and you inherited the painting legally." "Legal and right aren't always the same thing," I replied. "Victoria's case taught me that the art world is only as trustworthy as the people who choose to do the right thing, even when no one is watching." 5 years after Victoria's betrayal first shattered my world, I stood before an audience of 500 art professionals at the International Art Dealers Association's annual conference in London. I was delivering the keynote address on authentication, integrity, but more importantly, I was announcing the establishment of the Cultural Heritage Protection Initiative. The art world has always been built on trust,